Welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right in because today we're going to decode the blueprint of the state. Now, if you've ever felt completely lost staring at a mountain of government forms or trying to figure out exactly which public department is supposed to do what, believe me, you are definitely not alone. Administrative law is incredibly dense, it's heavily layered, and honestly, it can feel like an absolute labyrinth, even for the professionals who navigate it every single day. Just look at this quote right from our source material. It says, frequently, there are conceptual discrepancies between politicians, officials, academics, and professionals. So the big takeaway here is this. If the very politicians and public officials who are getting paid to run the state machine don't even fully grasp these terms, it's absolutely no wonder the rest of the public feels so lost. Well, today we're going to fix that. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll be hitting 1, the labyrinth of the state; 2, ways to organize power; 3, decentralization versus deconcentration; 4, citizen, client, or user; and finally, 5, your rights against the state. Part 1. State Labyrinth. Administrative Function. Before we can really navigate the halls of power, we have to understand what this massive state machine is actually built to do in the first place. At its core is the administrative function. This is the main activity of the state, executed under a really strict legal order to satisfy general interests. You can kind of think of this as the actual day-to-day work the executive branch does to keep society running. It's the engine of the state, consuming resources and operating within a very rigid legal framework to manage everything from public health to building roads. It's the engine of the state.
Section 2. Organizing power. Ways to organize.
Now that we know what the engine does, let's look at the actual floor plan of this massive bureaucratic architecture. How does a government practically distribute its power to get things done? Well, this matrix breaks down the 4 main ways a state distributes its power: centralization, decentralization, deconcentration, and delegation. What's super interesting here is how power flows. In centralization, decision-making is unified right at the very top of the pyramid. But, as a state grows, it has to distribute those tasks. It might distribute them to specialized, somewhat independent branches, like a central bank, or it might just push them down the chain of command to regional offices, like the army or a local school council. Section 3. Organization Forms. Clearing up mix-ups. Our source material highlights that this is exactly where the biggest legal errors happen, even among academics. So we need to bust some myths right now so you know exactly who you're dealing with. Here's the crucial difference, and you'll want to pay close attention to this. Decentralization creates an entirely new and separate legal entity with its own budget. Think of a national university. It manages its own wallet and governs itself, albeit under state oversight. Deconcentration, on the other hand, doesn't create a new legal person at all. It simply shifts tasks to a different desk or a lower office within the exact same entity. It's kind of like a massive corporation spinning off a completely independent subsidiary versus just opening up a new regional branch office. If you trace the dotted lines of power here, it makes perfect sense. Do you see how the decentralized entity at the bottom left operates in its own separate bubble, entirely outside the central administration bubble at the top? It's got its own legal structure. But look at the deconcentrated organ inside the top bubble. It's still trapped inside the main central administration, it's just positioned a bit lower down the hierarchy. Grasping this visual difference is absolutely key to understanding how state power actually moves, and ultimately who holds the purse strings.
Section 4. Citizen or client. Who are you to the state?
Let's talk about us, the people interacting with this massive machine. The state applies a surprisingly long list of labels to you, depending on what you're doing. Look at all the hats we wear. You might be categorized as a client, a citizen, a beneficiary, a right holder, a taxpayer, a recipient, a user, or even a consumer. And sure, it sounds like mere semantics, right? Just boring paperwork jargon. But using the wrong label fundamentally changes your legal standing, your obligations, and your entire relationship with the government. In fact, the authors of our source material issue a really strong warning about this. Recently, modern corporate jargon has crept into public management, and it's starting to refer to people as clients of the state. But the authors argue that treating a citizen merely as a client reduces you to a simple consumer. It completely ignores your constitutional rights and your collective democratic power. You aren't just buying a service from the government. You are an active participant who actually grants it legitimacy. Section 5. Rights versus the state. Your legal shield. That distinction we just talked about is vital, because now that you know you're a citizen with collective interests and not just a customer, we're going to hand you the exact legal armor you need to protect yourself when the state inevitably makes a mistake. Your legal armor against the state comes in 3 distinct levels. The first, the absolute baseline, is called a simple interest. This is basically the general interest we all share in seeing the law followed. To use a great example from our source, imagine you're walking downtown and you see a polluting carbon plant operating illegally. Your simple interest gives you the right to denounce it, to file a complaint. But here's the catch. The state isn't actually legally forced to answer you or resolve your specific complaint, simply because you aren't directly harmed more than anyone else in the broader community. But let's move one rung up the ladder to a legitimate interest. Now, imagine you actually live right next door to that illegal carbon plant. You're breathing in that smoke every single day. You now share a specific, direct impact with your immediate neighbors. This grants you a legitimate interest, which means you can file a formal administrative resource. And unlike a simple complaint, the state literally must review this, and they can be forced to annul the illegal permit that allowed the plant to open in the first place. Finally, we reach the very top of the legal ladder, the subjective right. This is exclusive protection granted specifically to you as an individual. Let's say that carbon plant wasn't just built near your house, it was built on your private property without your legal permission. No way, right? Well, you now have a subjective right. You don't just ask for an annulment, you can take the state to court and actually sue them for direct financial compensation for the damages they've caused you. Let's quickly review this escalating ladder of protection, because it brilliantly illustrates your power as a citizen. Step 1, simple interest. You have the power to denounce. Step 2, legitimate interest. You have the power to force an annulment. And step 3, subjective right. You have the power to sue for damages. Knowing your exact legal standing dictates your legal firepower. You absolutely have to know where you stand on this ladder to fight back effectively against bureaucracy. Which brings us to our final thought. Now that you've seen the blueprints, seen how power is distributed through decentralization and deconcentration, and understand the exact legal armor you possess, are you just a consumer of state services or an active citizen with rights to defend? The next time you interact with the state machinery, don't let the labyrinth intimidate you. You now have the vocabulary, you know the structure, and most importantly, you know your rights. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and as always, keep asking the right questions.